Valhalla was a huge success for Ubisoft, making over $1 billion, but it failed to hit home with old school fans and even newer players to the franchise in a number of ways, most notably its bloated story and mission design. Shadows counters this in numerous ways. Despite having a 30 to 40 hour runtime for the main narrative, it doesn't feel bloated, but the real difference lies in how it addresses the core issues that held Valhalla back. So what exactly did Shadows do differently? Let's dive in and learn how Shadows learned from Valhalla's mistakes. Let's first discuss the story as a whole. Valhalla was a story about a Viking coming to England to find a better life, and while there, Eivor gets involved in a bigger, more epic saga of secret organizations and conquering all of England, from London to Gloucestershire, Xenophinshire, you get the point. While this is an interesting story, it didn't hook me in. Shadows, however, is a more personal tale of defeat, rising from the ashes, and ultimately revenge. Assassin's Creed is so often about revenge, but it works. It makes it more personal, and I for one connect with the characters on a deeper level in Shadows. I share their feelings, I hate who they hate, and I love who they love. With Valhalla, I didn't really connect with Eivor on this kind of level. Sure, there were characters that I didn't like so much, but it never felt like it does in Shadows. I never had the urge to really get revenge or to save certain characters. Every main character target in Shadows had a part to play in the early parts of the story, and therefore are more important to Naoe and in turn to Yasuke, who actually ends up having a whole other story of enemies for himself. But I won't discuss that because of spoilers. So if the targets are more personal to Naoe and Yasuke, they are more important to me. Don't get me wrong, the villains are not as good as the early games like AC2, where you constantly see the enemy and cross paths multiple times before you can finally deal with them. Shadows takes a more secretive and investigation type approach, which is fun in its own way. I do long for villains of old, but let's not get sidetracked, that could be an entire video of its own. So my overall point is that the story feels entirely more meaningful than in Valhalla. Even the side targets nicely weave their way into the main narrative, where they are affecting the lives of the characters you meet, and you want to help them after they've helped you. There's a lot of targets in Shadows, but it manages to make a large number of them feel more meaningful, with missions centered around finding out who they are and taking them out, rather than just another name on a list like in Valhalla. I know Valhalla had you find out some information about targets, but in Shadows it's far more fleshed out. I think it helps that my morals and my ideas of life align more clearly with that of Naoe and Yasuke. And Viking conquering and their way of life as it is portrayed in Valhalla is not exactly one I agree with fully. On the whole, Shadows took what Valhalla did, but made it more personal, made me connect with the characters more, and that led me to enjoy the overall story more as I traipsed through the open world of Japan. Bloat was probably the biggest problem with Valhalla. Shadows tackles this by removing all that. Anything that could be considered as bloat in Shadows is a side quest, or it's completely optional. Valhalla had several acts that felt like side quests, like they didn't really have any impact on the overall story. I mean, there's an arc where, without spoiling anything, you do a whole love story for your blacksmith. Not Eivor with the blacksmith, but to find the blacksmith's love anyway. Basically, it has absolutely nothing to do with conquering England or saving your people. That is just one example of many of the arcs that felt little to no connection to the main thread. Shadow's main plot feels necessary, like every move counts and every target is a necessity to overcoming evil. Anything that involves fleshing out side characters or not strictly tied to the main storyline is put to the side and is optional for psychos like me who really want to kill every side target and learn everything about our supporting cast. Although we take personal journeys with our two protagonists, these feel essential in figuring out why and how our heroes are the way they are, how they got here and where they're going next. I love these missions despite some people maybe thinking it's bloat. I disagree. It feels like it's a part of the story as a whole and really adds to the experience. Are you enjoying the video? Why not subscribe with the bell on so you don't miss any of my upcoming Shadows content? Thanks! Now I know the video is titled Mistakes from Valhalla, or something similar to that, but I think Ubisoft Quebec, the lead developers on Shadows, learnt a lot from their previous two entries in the series as well. Syndicate and Odyssey were both made by the same studio, and all I'll say is the writing is less Tolkien and more Marvel adjacent. Now while I didn't hate the Marvel writing for a while, it has gotten old as of late and was never a good fit for Assassin's Creed anyway. The writing for their previous two games were in my opinion very underwhelming and just a bit silly. They didn't take themselves seriously, so neither did the fans. When I play Assassin's Creed, I want to be questioned and challenged on my thoughts and morals, about how I see the world and the best things for it. There wasn't many things in Odyssey like sticking eyeballs up goats' asses or Assassin's Christmas in Syndicate that really made me stop and think about anything other than, geez, I wish this wasn't so stupid. Imagine a dark and gritty Syndicate, where it's a tough life, things are really bad, and Jacob and Evie really have to struggle to take back London and free it from the oppressors. Jack the Ripper DLC is a perfect example of this. No jokes, no silly writing or one-liners, and no nonsense sequences of highly unlikely things happening. It's dark, and I felt everything I did was very important. Shadows is not silly at all. The characters are taking their situation seriously, so in the opposite fashion to Syndicate and Odyssey, so does the player. It means so much more when you're invested in the outcomes of situations instead of just going along for a funny ride. Odyssey does take it a bit more seriously than Syndicate, but then they decided to make all the RPG systems a bit ridiculous and meaningless. Cassandra or Alexios can sleep with just about anyone, even the main villain if they want to in a very pivotal cutscene. It just made it all feel meaningless. There was never any high stakes that made me really care about what was about to happen. Not because they weren't serious issues, but because the way they were written, in a way where it made it feel empty. Shadows strays far from that path and makes everything seem meaningful. There are moments of humor and lightheartedness, but they jive with the game, and it's not like Yasuke is yelling out stupid quips while dueling someone for the fate of Japan. No, he's taking it seriously. He needs to win that duel. Naoe needs to get her target. The characters approach these situations with such gravitas that it makes you, the player, also do the same. You are invested in this moment. It means something to you, and to the protagonists. I don't know how to explain how important this is for Assassin's Creed. This series made me question my own thoughts, made me imagine different futures or paths, and made me wonder who was really right. Was assassinating that target the correct thing to do? None of that is possible if you don't make the player invested in the stories and the moments of that story. Odyssey had a large problem with leveling. Simply staying on the main story was never enough to keep up with the aggressive leveling of the main story quests. Every 3 to 4 quests, you would have to go out and do side quests or other optional things to get XP. Now, Shadows hasn't exactly learnt from that mistake. Staying on the main narrative in Shadows will also see you woefully underleveled fairly quickly. So I'm not super happy about this, but I still personally haven't thought of a solution for this if you want to include so much side content. Because if you're doing a bunch of side content when the main quest will keep you up to level, then you're going to become very overleveled very quickly and make the main story easy. So while Shadows doesn't address this issue directly, as I stated earlier, the side targets are actually pretty interesting and attach themselves on nicely to the side of the main quest. So you will still get underleveled just following the main quest, but the targets you do track down will feel like they all relate and are part of the greater narrative, unlike some of the quests in Valhalla and Odyssey, which just feel disconnected and their outcome means nothing to the world as a whole. Odyssey and Valhalla had plenty of side content that actually had interesting stories and outcomes, but many of them were inconsequential to the story the game was trying to tell. I personally would rather the AC series wasn't an RPG in the first place, then we wouldn't need leveling and skill points and all that crap. But that's for another video. I am planning on doing a video about what Shadows got wrong, and another video on the things they got right, so stay tuned for where I'll discuss these things in further detail. Another significant problem for me with Valhalla was its setting and choice of protagonist. Late 9th century England isn't exactly a sprawling metropolis filled with thousands of people to blend with, or large buildings to parkour around. Shadows is set much later towards the end of the Sengoku period in the 16th century. So while the city's age and the size are much larger than that of Valhalla, the density and architecture isn't much improved for parkour and social stealth. In fact, Shadows has no social stealth whatsoever. Disappointing, I know. However, what this allows is for one of our 2 protagonists to act and feel much more like an assassin. There are definitely problems with the dual protagonist setup in Shadows, but again, let's save that for another time. Naoe, our shinobi, embodies what it means to be an assassin. Her playstyle is stealth, and it's a lot of fun. She's quick and nimble and has tools to assist you in taking down your targets quietly. Eivor, on the other hand, is slow, loud, and a big, bulky Viking. Eivor doesn't want to be an assassin. Eivor wants to run in and fight her way through hordes of enemies for the glory of Odin. There are also story spoiler things that make this point better for me, but I will refrain from using them here. So Shadows only kind of learnt from this, because while Naoe is the perfect assassin, Yasuke is the exact opposite. He is an absolute beast, don't get me wrong. Story-wise, he is amazing, but gameplay is more akin to Eivor. I understand completely why they did this, but I just don't think that the gameplay fits very well in what this series should be. That's just my opinion though. They made Yasuke so the newer people to the franchise who got started with Origins or the other RPGs will have their big warrior type character to play. but it simply doesn't work for this series. But let's all rejoice, because you can mostly play with Naoe, like I have been doing for 90% of my playthrough. And she's great. She is much better at stealth than any of the other protagonists from Origins, Odyssey, or Valhalla, and makes you really feel like an assassin stalking their prey, picking off enemies one by one until you have cleared a path to your main target. The thing is, Evie was also a fantastic stealth character in Syndicate, so it took them a minute to get back to something they already did well. All in all, despite the dual protagonist shortcomings, Naoe as a protagonist is a welcomed improvement and a learned lesson from Valhalla. I would like to quickly mention the combat too. Valhalla felt sluggish and became a bit boring towards the end, especially since so much of the game was centered around it. Shadows has toned down a lot of the combat to where most of the game can be completed in stealth. However, in the times where combat is mandatory or you mess up stealth, it's a much more engaging system to me. Initially, I thought it was a bit button mashy, similar to Syndicate, but the more I played, the more I realized there was more to it. There are plenty of different ways to approach combat, either going for raw stats and outplaying your opponents, or creating a build to do specific things. The best way to do this is to attempt to keep enemies in the yellow stunned phase where they take more damage. There are many abilities and skills that can be used to get enemies into this state, and many builds can do this indefinitely. There is a set of armor for Yasuke which makes you able to parry unblockable attacks, which completely changes the way you approach combat. It can still be a little button mashy, but as time goes on I've learned to appreciate it more and more and found out the intricacies of the systems in play. In Valhalla, it didn't really feel like you had that many options. It all felt like everyone was probably playing the combat much the same way. And I am so glad that they improved the combat in Shadows, especially seeing as one of the protagonists is a samurai. This one is bound to spark disagreement. I think that the mountains and forests in Shadows is a huge improvement over Valhalla's world design. I know you're thinking how much you hate the mountains and forests, stopping you from running in a straight line to your next quest. But that was the intention, and I think that's great. Please hear me out though. In Valhalla, riding your horse to the next location was boring. You simply rode in one direction in a straight line towards it, not caring about what's in your way because the world allowed it. In Shadows, it isn't as easy to traverse a mountain or go through a dense forest, much like it is in real life. And because of that, it forces you to go around the mountains and forests using paths. Or if you refuse to adapt, you will struggle trying to brute force your way up a ridiculously realistic mountain. Just like real life, it's going to be hard work to walk in a straight line up a mountain, instead of following the paths around the mountain. 99 times out of 100, you will find the path that leads to your objective. But not only that, you will find many mini activities and things that you would have otherwise missed along the way. When I first started playing, I too was getting frustrated by the landscape, until I switched it up and decided to play it more realistically, finding paths and exploring the world more naturally. And I have to say, it's been an absolute joy. I embraced it, and now I don't want it any other way. There are so many things you find along the way, whether it be small side content, temples, secrets, towns, villages, wandering Ronin, and so much more. You had none of that. You missed everything along the beaten track because you were galloping just in a straight line to your next quest. I think this is an amazing improvement that is probably going to be hated by a lot of people. I think playing Death Stranding and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has taught me a lot in the ways of patience and how much better it is to explore a world in a more realistic way, instead of trying to complete main quests as quickly as possible, and just living in these worlds instead. So a few notes at the end here. I wanted to mention the assassination damage thing here. Now in the previous 3 RPGs, you had to get right up close to a target to know if you were going to assassinate them. And in Odyssey's case, you still didn't know with this silly crit thing that, the whole thing just disrupted stealth. But with the new system, the chunk system, you know exactly who you can assassinate every time you tag them from across the map. So you know before you get over to them whether you can assassinate them or not. And I think this system is so much better, but I've gone over this in a couple of shorts, and Leo K has made a perfect video which explains this much better than I ever could, so I'll leave a link to that down in the description. If I've forgotten, please remind me, that video is fantastic. And I also wanted to quickly mention there doesn't seem to be any mystical dream sequences or any of that complete and utter bullshit. I don't want this crap in my game. Please, I don't want to go to Valhalla. I don't want to go to Svartalfheim or whatever the heck it was called. I don't want to do that. I want to stay in the reality that Assassin's Creed set up. So I'm happy that that is not in Shadows. That is a bigger point for another video, I think. So while Shadows is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, I still think it took some great lessons from previous AC games, and more specifically from Valhalla, to craft a much more assassin-style game that I have enjoyed much more than the 2 previous RPGs. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks to my patron, Alex Applegate. Link in the description if you would like to support me further there. Thanks again for watching. Sticks out.